Hey guys, I'm the Comics Kid 2099, and I'm here to talk to you about a book that I finished reading last night. This is Fantastic Four, the George Pérez Visionaries Volume 1. This is kind of sort of like, you've got books like the Walt Simonson Visionaries for Thor, or the John Byrne Visionaries for Fantastic Four, or the Chris Claremont New Mutants Visionaries. Those books, it's like you have this creator, this really well-known creator, well-liked creator, who has a very long run on a series, and then these volumes collect that run. This is not exactly like that, because this is George Pérez is the artist on this book, but he is not the writer. And so it skips huge chunks of issues that he is not drawing because he's not involved with those issues. So this doesn't feel like those other books where it's a run and you're reading it for the story so much as this is just a collection of issues of Fantastic Four that George Pérez drew. For example, let me go ahead and tell you which issues are collected here. It's 164 through 167, 170, 176 through 178, and 184 through 186. And I have to say, when I first started reading this, it kind of bothered me that it was skipping all of those issues, because I'm much more of a story guy. I like art. Obviously, if you didn't have art in comic books, you would just have prose. And I like comic books for the synthesis of words and story, or rather, words and art. I like both, but when I'm reading a comic book, I'm much more into the story. That's what I'm reading it for, really. And so it kind of bothered me that I was expecting this to be one solid unbroken run of issues, and it wasn't that. And so this isn't so much the Visionaries of George Pérez, this is just a bunch of issues of Fantastic Four that George Pérez drew. And I will say it does a pretty decent job of getting you caught up if you do happen to skip some of those issues. And of course, if you're reading this book, then you are going to skip some of those issues. There's like 5 or 6 issues that you're going to be missing. 170, and then it jumps to 176. It does a pretty good job of getting you caught up on what's happening. It's just a little aggravating. It's kind of like if you were going to read a Harry Potter book, and then you read chapter 1, and then you jump forward to chapter 5 without reading those other chapters. Maybe the book will make sense if you do that, but it's not meant to be read that way. And in the same way, I really do wish that they had collected those other issues in some way, but I guess I can understand why they didn't, because they're marketing this as Fantastic Four by George Pérez, and since he wasn't the writer, then it's just collecting the stuff that he was involved with. I understand that. Keeping all that in mind, is this a book that I would recommend? I would say, if you're a pretty big fan of the Fantastic Four, then yes. This is going to be pretty standard Fantastic Four stuff. That's the kind of problem that I have with this. I realized while I was reading this that I'm not a huge fan of the Fantastic Four. I've read a few runs of the Fantastic Four, the Mark Waid stuff in the early 2000s, which is my favorite, and then I've read just a very little bit of the John Byrne run, and I plan on reading all of that and reviewing it on this channel in the future, and then I've read this right here. And what I've noticed in reading all of the Fantastic Four stuff that I've read is that it is possibly one of the most static series that I've ever read, where the characters are absolutely not allowed to grow and change over time. If you look at the Avengers, the series first started with Thor, Ant-Man, Iron Man, the Wasp, and the Hulk. And then a few issues later, they get rid of the Hulk and they bring in Captain America. And then about 10 issues after that, they get rid of everybody and they bring in a whole bunch of former supervillains. And the Avengers was a series where they realized that it didn't exactly work in the beginning, and so they had to find ways to change it and make it work. And as such, the Avengers is a series that is allowed to change and grow over time. You've had series of Avengers where it's not the same team as issue 1 or issue 50 or issue 100. They change the lineup every so often, and in doing so, they are then allowed to have different characters, and therefore the characters can go through different kinds of arcs because you've got different characters, and you can have different kind of scenarios that these characters can go through. The problem with the Fantastic Four is that it's the same 4 characters over the last 50 years. Now, I do realize there were a few eras where one or more of the characters had left the team. For example, after Secret Wars, the Thing had stayed on this alien planet and She-Hulk was replacing him on the team. And then you have, in the mid-2000s, Reed Richards and Sue Storm left the team briefly to kind of rekindle their marriage, and Storm and Black Panther replaced them. But usually that was just for brief periods of time, and always you knew that this team, the original four guys, well, four people and one girl, you knew that they were going to come back eventually. They were all going to join forces together. And it seems like when you are limited on the number of characters that you can use and the specific characters that you can use, you are also limited on what kinds of stories that you can do. These characters are always going through the same character arcs. This book deals with the Thing being upset that he looks like a monster. This is absolutely nothing new. This is like 180 issues into the series and he's still upset that he looks like a monster. And that's something that he is always upset about. That's something that's very prevalent in the John Byrne run. That's prevalent in every run of Fantastic Four. Here we have Johnny Storm. He's unlucky in love. He's looking for true love. That's something that's very prevalent in the John Byrne run. That's prevalent in every run. These characters are not allowed to grow and change and evolve and become new kinds of characters. It seems like everybody who has ever worked on the Fantastic Four, at least the runs that I have read, it seems like they are, even if they're not aware of it, they are keeping these characters in the archetypes that they were in when they were first created. And personally, I would like to see the Fantastic Four grow beyond that. I would like to see Johnny Storm act more like a leader. I would like to see Reed Richards and Sue Storm maybe grow a little older and be more middle-aged and not quite as young as they are. I would like to see these characters grow beyond the archetypes that they were first created to be in, if that makes any sense. And how this all comes back to the George Pérez stuff is that, like I said, if you are a huge Fantastic Four fan, then you probably like that. You probably like that the Fantastic Four are kind of stuck in this rut and they are never allowed to change. If you like that stuff that they are always doing, if you like the same old, then you're going to like that the series never changes and it's always the same old. And therefore, you will like this because it's more of the same. If you don't like that, if you would much rather have a series that is dynamic and is constantly changing and evolving over time, then you're probably not going to want this. You could probably just go and read the Stan Lee, Jack Kirby stuff, and then you don't have to read any other Fantastic Four stuff unless I come back and tell you that there's one particular run that's really good. But really, I realize that the reason I'm not a huge Fantastic Four fan is because it's always the same old. That's the short story of it. I wish that I could say that that's not true. I wish I could say that Fantastic Four is a series that is allowed to change and grow over time, kind of like the X-Men or the Avengers or even Spider-Man. I know Spider-Man is kind of stuck in this rut where he's not allowed to change very much, but even Spider-Man changes more than the Fantastic Four does. And that kind of bothers me. I really like these characters, and I really like a lot of the stories that I've read with the Fantastic Four. I just wish that the characters and the stories were allowed to go further than what they do. And that's basically all I have to say here. Probably, if I do review the Volume 2 of the George Pérez run, which I do have that volume, it will probably be a very similar video to this one, where I won't have a whole lot of different stuff to say. I guess I should talk about the art real quick before I turn this video off, since this is collected for the art and not so much for the story. The George Pérez stuff here, it's serviceable, but this is not the same George Pérez that you might be aware of if you've read Crisis on Infinite Earths or his Teen Titans stuff, or basically anything from the 1980s forward. This really feels like Pérez is being restrained in what he's allowed to do. When he gets on Teen Titans, he basically just reinvented those characters visually from the ground up, and I really feel like he was allowed to grow more as an artist on that series and on Crisis on Infinite Earths than he was here. Here, I feel like he's sort of, you can kind of tell that it's Pérez, but I really feel like he's trying to channel Jack Kirby. It's Pérez trying to do someone else, and therefore, he isn't allowed to really be his own man here. That's why I don't really feel like the art is as good here as it is on some of the other stuff that he did later on in his career. It's still serviceable. It's not bad art by any means, but if you are a fan of George Pérez art, then this is probably going to be a little bit disappointing to you. So I hate that this video was such a negative video. I didn't hate this book. I enjoyed it okay. It just wasn't the best thing that I've ever read, and for the reasons that I said, it wasn't. That's all I have to say here. Hopefully this video was helpful for you guys if you were on the fence about whether you should pick this book up or not. I will probably see you guys in a couple of days with another kind of review, and I will see you guys next week with more reviews. So until then, I'll see you guys later. Have a great day.